And we're really happy to be here this week. We've had a lot of shows where the news wasn't so good out of the courtroom, but I'll tell you, the last 7 days have been absolutely incredible. Had remarkable things happening, things that I never dreamed I would ever see. So we're going to hear all about it tonight. We have our co-host who's been online, but no video tonight. That's Bernadette Pager. Bernadette, you want to say hi? How do you do to everyone? Yes, it is great. Except you both are near the water, and the water. Now you know where I'm from, right? The water. But I'm in New York, so I won't be at the seashore anytime today. But this show tonight is brought to you by Patricia Finn, attorney. Your vaccine and exemption attorney. We've been doing business here in New York State for the last 20 years or so, helping individuals abstain from vaccines that violate their religious beliefs, or they may have a medical reason why they can't be vaccinated, or sadly, someone you love has been injured by a vaccine. We're probably the lawyers to call. In fact, I'm sure we are. There aren't a whole lot of lawyers out there doing this, except today, ta-da, we are introducing a remarkable attorney who, before the show, was telling me that he had a very quiet life and practice, and now he's really out there, and he's my hero celebrity. I'm telling you, this guy is a great attorney. And allow me to introduce Jeff Childress. He has won two amazing cases, or at least he's got a temporary restraining order that we're going to talk about that he got this week. And then about 2 months ago, Jeff also got a very important win in the circuit court in Florida from Justice Tannenbaum on a mask mandate, which we jumped all over here because masks right now are really where I'm focusing. So, without further ado, Jeff, welcome to the show. Tell us all about your good work. We're pretty good. There's a reason why, and it's because this is a very stressful area. It's something that I've been doing for a long, long time, and we had, relatively good success along the way, and then with COVID, it's just absolutely exploded. But there aren't a lot of lawyers doing this kind of work. So now that you and many, many others have stepped up, I just want to tell you thank you. I mean, those of you who don't know, I was communicating with Jeff, and I kept writing my hero, and you are my hero. And let me ask you though, what made you step up? Is it uh, your client? Somebody came to you, or do you have a personal interest in this? What is it? And that's green. Is that green? Okay. My gosh.
Way, right? He was not advocating that anybody don't wear masks. At his small business, all his employees were masked, and he put the signs up that the county gave him, but he took them to court, right? And that's how our process works, right?
Yes. Yes.
He did it the right way. So anyway, I started to dig into the issue, and it seemed to me that this was a constitutional problem. And you just tell me how much background you want on the mask case, but
The whole thing. I mean, I mean, I know a lot about it because I was following it very closely. And the minute that decision hit the books, I was in Brooklyn arguing the mass case, and I went running in, Justice Tannenbaum's decision, and looky here, But I know all about it, but I don't think our listeners do. And
yeah,
we're really masked up here in New York, unlike Florida with your wonderful governor who, I mean, just can't say anything bad about the guy. He's really, really a great guy. But anyway, no, tell us the whole background. I'm sure Bernadette and I want to hear what you have to say.
okay. Well, I had to make some early strategic decisions, and over time, I think there were more than 40 mass cases filed all around the state of Florida, and all of them got dismissed except for mine. And I think the reason was I made some kind of unique and creative strategic decisions early. And one of them was, in May of 2020, you have to remember we were at the peak of mask hysteria, right? People were freaking out. And it was, if you didn't wear your mask, you were killing grandma and all of that stuff, right? And so I was very careful in everything that I filed in court to begin every pleading, every motion, everything, the appeal, everything, saying this is not a case about whether masks work or not. We are not asking the court to decide that, right? Because I knew it was just a bridge too far. No judge wanted to be the judge who was the anti-mask judge, right?
Right? Yep.
And so what I then said was, I just want the court to determine whether constitutional issues are implicated or not. That's it. That's all we're asking the court to do. Just tell us if it implicates constitutional issues. And I knew if I could get that little Lego brick, then I could build whatever I wanted out of it, right? And we could kill the masks. And it would give the judges cover because they're not deciding whether masks work or not. They're just saying whether, I'm not even saying, Judge, tell me if it's unconstitutional. I'm just saying, tell me if constitutional issues are implicated, because under the law, if it implicates a fundamental constitutional right, then the government has the burden of proving a standard called strict scrutiny. And it's the highest standard of all. And the government almost always fails to prove strict scrutiny. And we can talk more about that in a minute if you want to. And I can explain how strict scrutiny works and why it's so difficult for the government to meet that burden. But that was where I started. And then I had to decide whether to go into state court or federal court. And a lot of the other cases were being filed in federal court. And I ultimately decided I like my chances better in state court. I knew from the time I filed the complaint that I was going to lose at the trial court when I asked for the injunction.
Yeah. Let me just interrupt for a second because I think that's such an important point. I mean, people really need to understand. There's not a lot of judges out there at the trial level that are willing to delve into this. There's been a ton of case law that basically says, it's discretionary. It's up to the public health official. So your strategy, is brilliant. One, you're not arguing, is it safe? Is it effective to wear masks, which is something that I've done. And then you asked, is it constitutional? And I mean, I don't want to jump ahead, but Judge Tannenbaum said it is presumptively unconstitutional. That was huge, huge.
Yeah.
So, yes, and I want to hear more about strict scrutiny. because that is, again, another key here. And I'll let you explain it. But if you get a rational basis review, you're shot. But
That's
if you can get strict scrutiny, you win. I mean, from
right.
constitutional law in law school, I that is one of the lessons that I remember very clearly. So tell us more about your strategy with that.
Sure. So I would also add I agree with everything you just said. Plus, in Florida, our circuit court judges, which is the trial court level, are elected. And so I knew that all of my judges that I could get on the case had to be reelected in the Blue County during the height of mask hysteria, right? So there was no way they were going to enjoin the mask mandate. So I was already thinking about the appeal. And when I talk to my peers around here, the kind asking for their advice and things, the feedback I was getting, again, this is last year. Things are so much better this year, so much better. But last year, I was on an island and I would talk to my peers and they would say, Jeff, why are you throwing your career away for something that's going to be over with in a few weeks? Right. And I was like, I just don't think this is going to be over in a few weeks. I think if they get a taste of being able to do this, then they're just going to start doing a whole bunch of other stuff that
Right.
we're not going to like even worse. And I told a lot of people at that time that I thought the mask thing was a warm up to the vaccines because they were already talking about the vaccines last summer, right? And it just seemed like the kinds of arguments that we were hearing from government officials could be equally applied to a mandatory vaccination law. So even back in May of 2020, when I was preparing my complaint and organizing my counts and things, I was thinking ahead, all right, how can I best get a decision now that can help me later to fight off the mandatory vaccines? So that primarily is why I went under the right of privacy. And I think I was one of the few attorneys in the state to make that constitutional argument. Most of the arguments that I saw in the other cases were about whether masks were medical devices or not.
The EUA arguments,
Correct.
emergency use authorizations.
Right.
Okay.
These are smart attorneys, and I'm not, Patty, nothing I'm saying should be taken as critical of what anybody else was doing. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But it just seemed to me with my litigation experience that I could just imagine a judge saying, well, Mr. Childers, are you telling me that if I cut up a t-shirt, that turns it into a medical device somehow? And I thought, I just don't want to have to answer that question. So I said, it doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter if it's a medical device or just a piece of clothing. They can't tell us what clothing to wear.
Right.
That's unconstitutional. That invades our right to privacy. So I put it all on the right to privacy because the law in Florida is really well developed. And I think there's federal law on this too, that the right to privacy encompasses a right to bodily autonomy. And we're familiar with that line of reasoning from all the abortion cases, right? Ironically, all that law developed in those abortion cases is now right front and center and available to us to use to defend against all this government overreach. In fact, in the Green decision, I'll get to the appellate part in a sec, but you'll see they relied on a case, Gainesville Woman Care, very heavily, which was one of the famous Florida abortion cases, ironically, also out of Gainesville. So back to the trial court, we went to the hearing on my emergency motion for a temporary injunction. And as I expected, the judge denied it. And so we immediately filed an emergency appeal at the First District Court of Appeals. Now, the First District Court of Appeals in Florida sits over 33 counties out of 67. It's a big district. There's only 5 district courts of appeal in Florida. And our first DCA sits in Tallahassee, which is the capital of Florida. So it's an important district. It's very well regarded and considered to be a very smart panel. Well, I worked, I'm not an appellate attorney, but I worked night and day on that to do my very best work because I just felt how critical this was. This was the first one. Nobody else had done it. There wasn't an appellate court in the country going against the masks, right? So I was, not only did I have to convince them I was right, but that they should stretch and crawl out on this branch politically and take a stand against the masks. So we got our, the appellate court denied my motion for expedited briefing, but sua sponte, meaning on their own, they set a briefing schedule with no extensions. So your normal appeal gets stretched out and it takes forever because attorneys always ask for extensions on their briefing deadlines. But the first DCA said, we're not going to have any extensions without really good cause. So that was an incredible blessing that they gave us that. So we got the briefs filed sort of by the end of July, and then unexpectedly, because neither the county or I had asked for oral argument, the first DCA set oral argument on its own. So and that's very unusual. They typically, they're appellate judges. They're super smart lawyers, right?
Yeah, they sure are.
Right. What do they need from us, right? But in this case, they did want to hear from us. And so they set oral arguments for November. And in November, we went to orals. And, it was a pretty intense oral argument. And for your listeners that don't really know what I'm talking about, I'm sure they've seen video at the Supreme Court, with the judges sitting up there and the lawyers, and the judges are peppering them with questions and things like that. That's appellate oral argument. So it's not just where you get to stand up there and say a bunch of stuff, but you have to you have to answer really hard questions that the appellate judges fire at you machine gun style. And it's very intense. So anyway, we did that, and kind of the sense of folks that were watching is that that at least two of the judges favored our argument, but it's impossible to tell. And sometimes a judge on an appellate court seems like they like you, and then they write a completely opposite opinion and tear you to shreds.
Yeah, boy, does that happen a lot. I just argued a case in the Fourth Appellate Department here in New York State, and I was trying to read the bench, and I kind of like that rapid questioning. For me, I like it to be focused. As soon as they ask you something, then you know where you need to go. So I like it, but yeah, you never really know what they're thinking. I guess they're trained like that. I know when I did an interview on the news, I heard the reporter saying, "I was smiling. We have to redo this. I can't be smiling." And then I thought about it, and I'm like, the guy didn't move. Or do you ever see them on TV? The newscasters, they never move. They don't move their heads or anything. So I know an appellate panel can be pretty scary sometimes, but apparently you persuaded them and got this brilliant decision. I mean, that was really, really good. And then but in the meantime, though, the mask mandate was repealed, right, by your governor.
Yeah, so that was another very interesting and sort of unique element to all of this, which is they took their time. So from the November oral arguments, we didn't get a decision until May. And in the meantime, the county dropped the mask mandate. And I didn't know what the appellate court was doing. When they take that long, you speculate like crazy, right?
Yeah.
What are they doing? Does this mean we win? Does this mean we lose? Are they writing a giant opinion about how this,
is the worst case ever?
Yeah, exactly. So we negotiated with the county attorneys, and they agreed to drop the mandate. We agreed to voluntarily dismiss the complaint. And then I'm obligated as an officer of the court to inform the appellate court and file what's called a suggestion of mootness, and let them know that it's moot now because we dismissed. So there's no controversy for them to rule on. And I was disappointed about it because I wanted to know, but ultimately, what I was trying to get for the citizens of Alachua County was relief from this mask mandate. So it was a tough decision, but that's what we decided to do. And then I don't even think it was a month later, they issued the opinion. And in the opinion, they said, "Oh, no, it is not moot."
Wow, I did not know that. That's an interesting step there.
there's a lengthy footnote starting on page 1 where they they admit that we filed the suggestion of mootness and the case was dismissed, but Judge Tannenbaum said that during a pandemic, it isn't moot because it could come back.
Right, right. I read that. Right.
Yeah, it was.
That's remarkable. You know what? Let me ask Bernadette a question because we're lawyers. And I just want to see if Bernadette has any questions or comments. Pretty remarkable, huh, Bernadette?
It really is. And I'm just hanging on every word. I'm learning from you, because I am not an attorney. Yeah. So I got nothing to add here. You guys just keep going.
Bernadette, though, did you notice how Jeff talked about not getting involved in the EUA matter, the emergency use authorization?
Yeah. And, that's really interesting from the conversations that I've had with you, Patty, about how things have gone in the past and the things I've read regarding, mostly like vaccination issues is, judges and courts really don't want to weigh in on the science or medicine. That is such a tricky place. And I think he was brilliant to stay not just with the Constitution, but what was that language he used? But just whether or not you're entering constitutional territory or something, it's just stepping up to it, but not into it completely. That I think is brilliant.
Yes, it was. It was really a remarkable strategy. There was a California case. I think it was UCLA, and the issue of emergency use authorization was taken head on, and Judge and in the Indiana case too, Indiana University judges basically are saying, it's safe enough. So that's like pretty remarkable. I mean, I raised EUA, but tangentially, I didn't necessarily. It is not the focus of my mask argument. My mask argument isn't even constitutional, although I did have an amicus brief filed by Moms for Liberty in Suffolk County. A very brilliant lawyer, called me out of the blue and filed an amicus arguing constitutionality. But the New York courts here have not been too friendly towards that argument when it comes to mandates. So I stayed away from that too. Our strategy was statutory authority. Is there an authority for the governor or even the commissioner of health to mandate a mask? And I think, Jeff, I told you about that wonderful lawyer out in Illinois who won a case, or I think he got a temporary restraining order last week. He argued that the mask mandates under the public health law require consent. And if you don't get the consent, then you have to get a court order. So all these regulations that, and let me see, we have a directive, we have a regulation, a directive, an opinion, a plan. I mean, there was like 10 different categories, but not one of them is a court order. And quite frankly, that's all that counts. So we're hoping to amend our complaint in that regard with respect to the masks to argue, in the absence of a court order, there is a state in this school in this state that can mandate a mask mandate without a court order. And, to be honest with you, it was really, I don't know if you know Tom DeVory. He's an attorney in Illinois, and he's been very, very aggressive too. I actually would like to bring him on and maybe have a panel of all of the lawyers that have been involved here. So not only can we educate the people, but we can educate each other. So anyway, tell us what Judge Tannenbaum said, though, about strict scrutiny. Since we have a constitutional issue, it follows that implicates fundamental rights of bodily autonomy that we automatically get in strict scrutiny. What did the judge say about that? Or did he?
Yeah. So Judge Tannenbaum, who was the judge who primarily authored the opinion, said that he totally agreed and went beyond what we had argued. And he said in a very spicy decision that your listeners would be really encouraged to read, because he really tears into the county commissioners and paints them as, I don't know, he uses words like diktats and the yoke of this policy being put on the citizens and things like that. So it's got some.
Now we did circulate it. I have in my newsletter, but maybe after tonight's broadcast, I'll circulate it again. And you don't have to go to law school to understand these decisions, especially the ones that are well written, like Judge Tannenbaum's was. I mean, I'll tell you, there was a decision here in New York in December in a case called CF versus City of New York, and it was kind of a devastating decision on our part. And I did see a lot of problems with, well, not a lot, but there were a couple of significant problems. One being the court described any information contrary to the narrative that mask work, vaccines are safe, as being fringe science.
Wow.
And I disagree. But the point I'm making about that decision is it was penned by Judge Shankman. And as far as I can tell, he's probably one of the strongest judges that I've read and seen in a long time. And it's a super tight decision, and it created a lot of problems with regard to constitutionality here in New York. The constitutionality of the mandates. The appellate division's second department in Judge Shankman's decision basically said, look, Jacobson v. Massachusetts, which is the case when all of this comes down to it, basically said, I believe verbatim, that a mandatory vaccination does not violate the Constitution. And I argue
that's not all it says, Patty, and we can talk.
Yes, that's right. It goes on to say more, and that is being overlooked. No, let's talk about it. What's your view on Jacobson?
So Jacobson came up in my vaccine case, obviously, right? When the City of Gainesville filed their brief in opposition to our motion for an injunction, they spent a page and a half on Jacobson. But I knew Jacobson was my case. And so when I argued, I said, Judge, it was a mistake for the city to rely on Jacobson because it supports the plaintiffs. And here's why. Because what Jacobson says, as clear as day, is that the federal Constitution doesn't have anything to say about mandatory vaccinations. Right now, this is before the Supreme Court discovered a right to privacy in the penumbra of the Constitution in Roe versus Wade, right? Long before. Jacobson was in 1905, Roe was in like 76 or something. So in any event, it doesn't matter because Jacobson says that when you have a mandatory vaccination law, you look to state law for the answer. State law. I said, guess what we have, Judge? We have a right to privacy in our Constitution.
Right.
So Jacobson is telling you that you have to look to the Florida Constitution for the answer. And the answer is right there.
That's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Actually, Bernadette is somewhat of a scholar when it comes to Jacobson. We've talked about the case many times on this show. Bernadette, what do you think about that? Jeff's view on Jacobson and the argument in Florida.
I love that. I think that there is so much more to Jacobson that ever gets talked about. And if you look at it really, really closely, I think there's an awful lot there that does protect individuals, depending on where you are and what your situation is. And I think people too often just say, oh, it just says it proves you can have mandatory vaccines. But it's not that simple. It really isn't. And even when that is a ruling that applies to your situation, there was just a fine involved, and it was only at times of outbreak. it wasn't like what we're, seeing so often here today,
Right.
Yeah. So I love that he read that so thoroughly that he was able to use it in the way he did. It's fantastic.
It is. And then, by the way, under state law here in New York, with regard to the masking, in order to get this the rub here is the courts have to determine that the masks are a quarantine or isolation, and the Illinois courts ruled that it was. Um, and I think other courts have too. I don't think Tannenbaum addressed that. Did he? That it was masking is a quarantine or an isolation. But the point being is, the public health law is very clear here in New York. You cannot get a quarantine or isolation order if the person is not infected or
Right.
or symptomatic or a risk. So you can't mask millions of children who likely have natural immunity already, because the research shows that COVID is being spread among children, and they are developing immunity without getting sick, which is what you want. You want that natural herd immunity. Many people talk about herd immunity and vaccines achieving herd immunity, but I know that Dr. Moss, a friend of ours, a West Virginia University medical professor and ethicist, has made it very clear, at least to me, explaining to me that that there is no such thing as vaccine induced herd immunity, that it only is in nature. So masking children is actually messing up the possibility of developing natural immunity. So I think the whole thing is pretty crazy. And I think, you got to be a little thick to really trust pharma after all that's gone on, and
Yeah.
really think that these people who have bungled everything here in New York, especially, actually care or know what they're talking about. And it's not fringe science. I'm sorry, Bernadette, what were you going to say?
Oh no, I'm just agreeing with you. I think what we saw pre-COVID with measles and even before that is this slow march to trying to criminalize natural immunity, criminalize letting yourself be susceptible to something pharma has created a product they're targeting. When
Indeed.
this natural immunity is superior by far, it is, and we have the unalienable right to get sick and achieve superior immunity. They can't strip that from us. And I'm hoping that this COVID chaos emerges in a place with that more firmly in place, that they cannot deny us the right to our form of immunization. I'll take nature's immunization, over pharma's immunization any day. And that's why the suppression of treatments, right? They're suppressing the treatments because if you can get through this safely and get superior immunization, what the heck do you need pharma for, right? What do you need the vaccines for? And that is what has been so criminal. I'm about to lose a dear friend because of the denial of the early treatments made it so difficult for my friend to get a hold of in time. He ended up in the hospital, and we're likely going to lose him. And it's criminal. It's absolutely criminal. Okay, I was squirreling, but yeah.
No, you know what? I am sorry about your friend. I know you had mentioned that before, and
Yeah.
and also too, it's an important point. I mean, I don't think any of us here, or people that may hold views similar to what we're sharing, isn't sensitive to the loss and suffering that many people have experienced. I even spoke to a doctor last week, an ER doctor, about a medical exemption. And, I discussed a lot of this with him. And he said, Patty, I'm in the ER and I'm seeing a lot of really sick people. But people are always sick. Hospitals always have shortages of beds. The hospitals are run like bad corporations taking advantage of healthcare workers, draining every penny out of it, drugging the daylights out of people. And, that's why we have a healthcare shortage or healthcare worker
Yeah.
shortage right now.
And
Is it
yeah,
because of COVID, or is it because, the elderly, unfortunately, when they die, it's generally from a virus
yeah.
that's well established?
Well, I want to add to that real quick, Patty, and then get back to our awesome guest here. Is that the if you are vaccinated, if you've had the first shot, they consider you to be unvaccinated for the numbers if you get COVID. If you've had the second shot, like for Pfizer or Moderna, and it hasn't been like the 2 weeks or whatever since, they call you under the numbers unvaccinated for COVID. Now we have a whistleblower here in Washington State that I can't reveal information about yet, but a whistleblower who's just now revealing that the information she's privy to in her hospital system, half of the COVID patients are vaccinated. Now, you're
Wow.
hearing on the news that 90% are unvaccinated, but we're hearing from all over that that's not the case. That's not the reality on the ground. And so, we're still being lied to, manipulated, and, there's just so much going on there. And then, like in Washington, so many people are either being fired or they're walking away from their jobs because of the mandatory vaccination by our governor. It's
Right.
horrible. We've got first responders and the healthcare system, nurses. They're even mandating chiropractors.
Well, I think here in New York, just let me digress slightly. We do have oral arguments scheduled on Wednesday at 10 o'clock in the Second Circuit here in Lower Manhattan, I think it is. And there are two cases regarding healthcare workers. So we represent thousands of healthcare workers here in our firm. And, we're telling everybody to hold on. This is pretty remarkable that the Second Circuit is consolidating and allowing these arguments. And, hopefully we can get a stay and these people will be able to have their, jobs. I was actually extremely impressed by the lawyering that went on there. So kudos to those lawyers involved, and we hope to bring them on the show. But anyway, Jeff, I want you to tell us now, if you will, about what happened last Monday, right? That you had another big win. Here's our hero. He's got two wins. So tell us about your remarkable win on Monday.
Yeah. So, and I want to make it clear that these cases are connected. Okay. So it's not just two separate things. The win that we had last Monday built upon what we did in the Green case. But 4 weeks ago, something like that, the city of Gainesville passed a very strict vaccinate or terminate policy, requiring all their employees to have proof of vaccination. The original formulation was by October 1st. They had to have both shots in by October 1st. They subsequently wound up moving it back, but only because they couldn't logistically handle that many people leaving at one time that quickly. So we had a couple of the employees come to the office and we talked to them and immediately agreed to take the case. And before the week was out, we had 250 plaintiffs.
Wow.
So 250 employees of the city. Now, just for comparison, the city only employs 2,200 people.
Wow. That's
So
great.
within a week, I had more than 10% of the entire workforce of the city of Gainesville
That
as my
is
client.
incredible.
Yeah. And so since you're a lawyer and you'll appreciate this, I had a lot of questions at the beginning. Well, should we just do a class action? And I don't know how it is in New York, but in Florida, there's a whole cottage industry of litigating early class action cases where they try to get your class plaintiffs dismissed as, not being a suitable class plaintiff. So before you can even get going on your lawsuit, you have to fight about whether you've met all the procedural preconditions for your class action. So I don't like that.
Yeah, I don't either. I have advised against that. I know we've had some cases where they've gotten like 12 or 15 and characterized them as putative classes. But, you go back to Roe v. Wade. That was one plaintiff that set, the standard for a lot of things, a lot of horrible things that have happened, I think. But anyway, so tell us more. Tell us everything.
So I said, we're not doing the class. I'm just going to put them all in the case caption. So our case caption goes on for like 2.5
Oh
pages.
yeah, I saw that.
It's
I-
great.
and then fortunately, you can add all them at the end, and you
Yeah, right.
revert.
Once we filed the complaint, we had all them after that. But we picked our best named plaintiff to be the
I
first.
I do that too all the time. I had
So,
Dovey Day, and I have one now. I'm bringing Rocco V. De Blasio. So yeah, I think those are the
yeah,
kind of names that you want. And we're going to talk more about Rocco's case next week, and we're going to be challenging the passports in New York City, and of course the public health law. It's a form of quarantine and isolation under the public health law, and you can't exclude people without a court order. So we're hoping for another win there. But anyway, we have and it's hard to believe it went so quickly. But tell us your outcome on Monday.
we had our injunction hearing, and within 36 hours, the court ruled in our favor and granted a full temporary injunction against the city's vaccine mandate, and said they can't enforce the vaccinate or terminate policy, and they can't discipline any employees for failing to comply with it.
Excellent.
By Thursday, the city commission met and they started talking about alternatives to their vaccinate or terminate policy. And they expressed no interest in taking us up on appeal because, don't forget, they would be appealing to the first DCA that just gave us the decision saying mandatory masking was presumptively unconstitutional. What do you think the first DCA might think about forced injections?
That's really remarkable. And, and here in New York, too, we've got these lawyers on Wednesday that, I mean, it's just been extraordinary what they've done. We don't have the good law, though, like you do in Florida. We don't, it's always been, and the cases that I've brought over the years, the courts are not listening to an argument on the constitutionality of forced vaccines. So I don't know what the Second Circuit's going to do. I know that there was another case. It was the court officers here in New York who got a restraining order on Friday, and it's the teachers, the healthcare workers, and the court officers. And that in that case, a state court judge said nothing about constitutionality, but rather it was a labor question. Is it a violation of their contract? But as far as I'm concerned, as long as they're slowing the brakes down a little bit for the wisdom to catch up with the stupidity, then maybe not to the court, but to our
I understand.
elected officials. I here in New York, you'll be very interested in our governor, our lame duck governor, Kathy Hochul, is planning on bringing in the National Guard to replace these healthcare workers that are getting
Yeah.
ready to walk off. And it's sad what's going on here. I mean, the nurses and I mean, what does that tell you when a healthcare worker doesn't want to take the vaccine? Somebody that's worked in the ER,
Right.
right?
That's true. And what does it tell you when public officials make decisions during the middle of a pandemic, when they're crying about hospital capacity, and they make decisions knowing that they're going to lose a substantial number of healthcare workers in those hospitals? How does that make any rational sense at all?
It doesn't. It's absolutely crazy. And you know what else really irks me to death is all this money and focus on this stupid vaccine and these stupid masks and that's my personal opinion, okay? And let me just say they are totally stupid. What about all the other
How do
things
you
that
really feel about it,
they're
Betty?
just stupid? There are so many other things going on. What about things like child abuse or the homeless problem? Right now in New York City, there's a new drug going around called Trank, and people are walking around like zombies. And it's not the heroin, Bob, that might be used to if you've ever seen anybody, unfortunately, suffering with addiction. This drug is the strangest thing ever. People bend over, but they don't fall down.
Mm.
They walk like they're zombies. It's amazing. And there were, there's hundreds of them. Or the Taliban. How come they're not wearing masks? I mean, I know they wear burqas and everything else, but I just don't get it. Why aren't we focusing on these quality of life issues? Even here in New York, where the Governor Cuomo was accused of killing people in nursing homes
Right.
because he sent them back with COVID. Now, because I don't believe that COVID is this deadly epidemic. It's just my personal opinion. What I do believe is that the elderly are mistreated, drugged to death anyway in the nursing home, and likely would have died anyway. The
Right.
problem with what the governor did was falsified the numbers,
Yeah.
and that was the crime.
Let me say
Pardon?
one thing about that comment that you just made, because you said something similar before when you and Bernadette were talking. And this is my chance to set the record straight. So I don't know if you know this, but I have a daily blog where I do a lawyer's spin on COVID issues. It's Coffee and COVID. And it's been going every day for 18 months. And that's because I'm clinically insane. And we get haters on there sometimes, right? So they come in waves and they'll come on the blog. It's on Facebook, and they'll post a lot of negative stuff and critical things and try to get me canceled and report me to Facebook and all this stuff. And sometimes I'll get doctors on there who are trying to, debunk me or whatever. And the number one argument that they make, they say, why does anybody listen to this guy? He's only a lawyer. He's not a doctor. He's not a scientist. He's not an epidemiologist, right? This guy's only a lawyer, just like you are only a lawyer, right? Well, hold on a second. I'm a litigating lawyer. And you know what I deal with all the time, Patty? Experts
Right.
all the time. And you know what my job is? My job is in a hurry to learn all this technical subject matter so that I can cross-examine the other expert and go toe-to-toe with them. And I can explain it to the jury in simple language so they can understand the complicated technical issues, right? And you have to do the same thing. And that's part of a litigator's job, is to get our arms around complex subject matter. And in a normal trial, I might only have a few days to read all the journals and the textbooks and everything and get my arms around it. I've been studying this disease for 18 months, right? So I might be quote unquote only a lawyer, and you might be only a lawyer. But that doesn't mean that we don't have a lot of insight into these issues to where we can cross-examine these scientists.
Indeed. Indeed. I mean, I've been at this 20 years, and I was a loner. I was kind of this offshoot that judges sort of tolerated because, it was just one kid out of thousands that didn't want to vaccinate. It was easy to accommodate them. But, things changed as the pressure to vaccinate increased. Anyway, Jeff, we're at the top of the hour, and I'll tell you, it went really, really fast. Can you tell everybody where they can find you, find your blog, and where they'd be able to get updates on what work you're doing?
Sure. If they just go to www.coffeeandcovid.com, they can sign up for my daily blog, and they can look through the history there. I wrote a really long article called How I Beat the Mask Mandate at the First TCA for anybody who's interested in the real nitty gritty details, and they'll be able to keep up with whatever we're working on.
That's really remarkable. And Bernadette, I don't know if you've run off to the beach, but I want to give you a shout out to tell everybody about your radio show and when you'll be back on the air.
Yeah, you betcha. Let me just say real quick, and Inform Life Radio, 3 to 5 p.m. Pacific time. Go to informedchoicelaw.org for more details, but I want to throw in there real quick. Also go to covidcon21.com. That's covidcon21.com. Upcoming conference October 14th through the 16th, focused on solutions. It's so important. Top people in this whole topic talking about solutions to move us forward, get our freedom back, get real health back. It's very exciting.
And Tennessee, real quick.
Oh, there's one in Tennessee called the Truth About Cancer.live. Truthaboutcancerlive.com is a huge conference coming up also in October. And about 50 speakers, too many to name, the top people in the whole movement. So that's the truthaboutcancerlive.com.
All right, great. And I'm Patty Finn, the Good Health Lawyer, and you're listening to WRSCR Radio, 1700 AM. You can reach me at patriciafinnattorney.com, and we'll be back Monday with more information to make you happy and healthy. All right, that's it for tonight, and thank you all. Thanks, Jeff, very, very much.
Good night.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Bye.